Where was Raven Beak when Aether fell? Or more generally speaking, why didn't any of the Chozo send aid to the Luminoth when the Ing were winning the war? Hello and welcome back to The Lore Raider, where we cover the great female-led video game franchises from Metroid to Bayonetta to Tomb Raider. If you enjoy this sort of content, consider subscribing, liking, and hitting the subscribe button. With that, on to the rest of the video. So why didn't the Chozo send aid to the Luminoth when Aether fell? Well, first I think we should set some context. Aether's fall began about half a century or so before the events of Metroid Prime 2 Echoes, when a Leviathan seed, a sort of living meteorite, smashed into the surface of the planet and created the dark mirror dimension known as Dark Aether, and with it a primitive and vicious species known as the Ing, who, due to their sheer weight of numbers and the already fragile state of the native Luminoth, effectively won the war. That is, until a certain bounty hunter arrived on the scene decades later, that is. Given from various sources, such as the Olympic trade data, which suggests that the Olympics, Chozo and Luminoth traded with one another thousands of years ago, a remnant of this partnership may have been the screw attack, which in Prime 2 the scan visor effectively confirms isn't singularly Chozo or Luminoth technology, thereby implying a fusion of both. So it's clear that the two species knew each other and seemed to have a positive relationship, so again, why the lack of help? 50 years before the events of Metroid Prime 2, which is set in 2026 of the cosmic calendar, therefore taking us back to 1976 more or less, the once magnificent Chozo Empire had long since declined from its peak as a military giant, and, as we learn from Grey Voice in the manga, which yes, it is canon, and the live-action Other M trailer designers were told to take reference from this manga and that it was canon by Nintendo. As I was saying, we learned from the Chozo that they had become complacent and lost their ability to fly and reproduce, and by 1976 they had been reduced to but a few meager holdouts. Their stronghold on planet Zebes, their colony on SR-388, the group from Elysia that made their home on Talon 4, and finally the Makan tribe's stronghold on ZDR. Of these four, only 3 were in any position to render aid, as at the exact same time, a Leviathan seed had smashed into Talon 4, and the introduction of the Phazon, the threat of the crazed Chozo ghosts, and the Metroid Prime threat had crippled the Chozo living there irreparably. Of SR-388 and Zebes, these planets had effectively the same 3 problems. Firstly, the Chozo had turned to pacifism, and had done so to the point that they had developed a mental guard of sorts, preventing them from causing harm to others, lest they put themselves through absolutely excruciating pain. Therefore, physically, these Chozo could do almost nothing to help the Luminoth. And yet there was more to the story, as both planets were focused on another threat entirely, the X-Parasites, and were in the midst of their Metroid project, which was going poorly. The so-called Telemetroids are almost certainly prototypes given their age of 50 plus years, and what with their failure to successfully conquer any planets and their abundance of weaknesses, and even almost half a century later in 2006 of the cosmic calendar, when Samus was 3, we see them effectively begging for material from backwater worlds and being refused. In other words, the Metroid project was a slow process full of failures, and clearly even the Chozo had invested all their resources into completing it, leaving them with nothing to give to the Luminoth. That's not to mention the Chozo also had a hand in the creation of the Galactic Federation, and its early pacifistic ideals, which spread their attention even thinner. This leaves only Raven Beak's stronghold of Chozo warriors on planet ZDR, the one and only force the Chozo could have possibly sent. So why didn't Raven Beak come to the rescue then? Well, I think the answer is fairly simple. He didn't know the Luminoth were in any danger. It's worth noting that there is no evidence any other faction of Chozo even noticed the plight of, say, the Chozo on Talon 4, let alone sent them aid. And for the Luminoth, there's no evidence they even sent a distress signal to the Chozo or any other race for that matter. And the trans-dimensional flux the planet was undergoing probably didn't help matters at all. But even if Raven Beak had somehow known, he probably wouldn't have sent help anyway, for several reasons. For one, he was cooperating with the Thoha on SR-388 and was no doubt keeping his forces ready to betray them, and he needed them ready to fend off any Metroid threat. And circumstantial evidence suggests he was working with Mother Brain to plan this mutiny. Zebes and SR-388 appear to have fallen to the Space Pirates and Raven Beak respectively at the same time, And yet Raven Beak did nothing to stop the space pirates and Mother Brain from taking Zebes, or eventually SR-388. In other words, Raven Beak almost certainly didn't care to help the Luminoth, and he was preparing his army to fry bigger fish, that being overpowering the Thoha and eventually securing himself a Metroid. So where were the Chozo when Aether fell? They were at once both incredibly diminished in power, largely incapable of doing any actual fighting, and in Talon 4's case, overrun by the Phazon. And yet they were exactly where they should have been, working diligently on completing the Metroid project in order to combat the X-Parasite and eventually help create the Galactic Federation in order to create a lasting peace in space. Well, that's all for me today. You know how I leave you. Be safe, be wise, and please pray for a true peace in space.